Hello everyone. Today we are going to discuss the poem O Captain, My Captain, written by Walt Whitman, and it is prescribed for the Degree III Sem students. The link for the Telugu version of this lesson is given in the description box. Those who want, you can click and watch it. And this poem is being discussed following the requests made by these two students, Ramya and Abeda. They have asked for this video and the video is ready. Come on, let us jump into the video. Walt Whitman wrote this poem, O Captain, My Captain, in response to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865. And this poem is an elegy. Elegy means a sad poem, written by Walt Whitman in 1865 to commemorate the death of the 16th President of United States of America. The tone of the poem O Captain, My Captain is mostly melancholy. That means it's a very sad and pensive poem expressing people's feelings when Abraham Lincoln died after the Civil War. The poet wants to convey that happiness and sadness go parallelly in life and are inseparable. The message that author wants to convey in the poem O Captain, My Captain is about mourning the death of the one who was the captain of the nation and rejoicing over the intertwined victory. Let us have a little bit of background knowledge to this poem, and that is Civil War. I think most of you know the relation between the Civil War and the United States of America. Okay, now let. So before that, United States did not have the 50 states like now, but there were a few states. But there was a strong difference between the northern states and the southern states. Like northern states, they were called as union states governed by union, and the southern states were called confederate states and governed by confederacy. The main difference between these two states are the northern states, they were focusing towards the industrial development and they were manufacturing the products like gunpowder and the weapons and the latest goods and all. Whereas the southern states, they were focusing more on the agriculture because the land was very fertile and agriculture was very popular over there. They were growing tobacco, sugarcane, and cotton plants very much. So that was the difference between these two states was slavery. The southern states were encouraging slavery and the slaves were imported from African countries. Whereas the northern states, they were opposing the slave trade. So this is the main reason for the civil war. Hope you are able to understand. So what is the misery of the slave trading? Let us look at the misery of this slave trading, and that slavery was called as the triangular trade because the black people of America, they were actually imported from these African countries. If you look at this picture, this North America, this is Europe and Africa. Between these three uh, countries, the trade was taking place. So the European merchants exchanged goods with Africans for slaves. So from this part, they were going to Africa to sell their goods. They were manufacturing goods like textiles and other goods, pottery and all. So they wanted to conduct a trade from Africa. The moment they reached Africa, they were shocked to see the misery of the people living over there. The black people were living there, and no food, no proper facilities for living a good, decent life. So when they were offered jobs, the Africans were ready to come with them. So the Europeans, they took the Africans as slaves and they took them to North America because they needed cotton and other products, the ingredients for their for the manufacturing of the products. So and because North American people needed people, these Europeans started importing the people as slaves from Africa to Northern America. So this was called as the triangular trade, and this passage was called as Middle Passage. So they shipped the slaves to the Americans sold them and brought goods from the Americans back to Europe. So this was going in a triangular form. So look at the misery of the slave. This is the picture of a ship, where thousands of people from Africa, they were loaded onto the ship, and the space was very small, and hundreds and thousands of people were loaded into that, and they were confined to the compartments of the ships. And this is the way how the slaves were transferred from Africa to Americans. So Africans were kidnapped and sold to European and American slave traders. They were chained and packed as close together as possible in the belly of the sailing ships. Those days, the transport was only through the ships. Sometimes allowed to move, but other times, chained for the whole journey. It is believed that 15% of the slaves died on the journey, up to 2 million. That comes to up to 2 million people they died, and estimated that 9.5 to 12 million slaves made the journey and began life as slaves in America. So by the time they traveled on the ships without proper food and without proper living conditions, they died on the way only, and they were thrown into the sea in the journey itself. That was the misery. If you look at this picture, you can see the compartments of the ship, students, here. The bottom compartments, they were filled with all the goods and the needed things, and the middle compartment, all the slaves, see how they were dumped into this, and the upper compartments were for the Europeans and the Americans who conducted this slave trading. And see, these are the people who were transported as slaves into the country. And when they tried to go away or run away from the ships, they were chained with these kind of chains, and then they were beaten like this. Students, you can see the marks of the beatings on their backs, how cruel they were. And these were the rings they were put around their necks and the legs, the iron rings. So this is how they were chained and brought to American countries. So, what was the main reason for the need for slaves? So, European settlers brought a system of slavery with them to the Western Hemisphere in the 1500. Unable to find cheap labor from other sources, white settlers increasingly turned to slaves imported from Africa. By the early 1700s in British North America, slavery meant African slavery. So these white people, they brought black people as slaves from Africa. So that you remember that the southern states were very much interested in importing African. So, around the same time, something unexpected has happened. That is, the mechanization of the textile industry in England led to a huge demand for American cotton. That is a southern crop. You remember in Mexican countries, the crop was grown, whose production was limited by the difficulty of removing the seeds from raw cotton by hand. So the process of separating the seeds from the cotton was very challenging and difficult. So they stopped producing cotton for a period, some period. But in 1793, a young Yankee school teacher, Yankee is a tribe from Mexican countries. So what did he do? He invented the cotton gin, a machine, a simple mechanized device that efficiently removed the seeds. So within a few years, the South transitioned from the large scale production of tobacco to that of cotton. So they stopped growing tobacco and they resorted to growing cotton because there was a large demand for cotton in European countries. So that was a switch that reinforced the region's dependence on enslaved labor. Once they started producing cotton, then there was a need for the slaves again in the southern parts of America. So, thus, the slave trade made the southern people rich and the dependency on slavery became inevitable. So, all these countries, these states, they became very rich because of the production of cotton, because of the tremendous increase in the production of cotton. They became very rich and they totally became dependent on the slavery because there were people who were doing the agriculture and all. So, what was the main reason for the Civil War then? So, for more than 80 years, people in the northern and southern states had been debating the issues on the role of slavery within American society that ultimately led to war. So, that was a strong difference. The northern states were opposing and protesting the slavery, but the southern states, they wanted slavery desperately. So that was the difference of opinion, and then this led to a kind of war, a cold war or a war, an open war between these two states, northern and southern states. So the American Civil War was fought between the United States of America and the Confederate States of America. The blue color states, they were called United States of America, and the federal government was ruling there, and they wanted the southern states also to stop depending on slavery or importing the slaves from African countries. So, meanwhile, what happened in 1861? Abraham Lincoln was elected the president, and he was such a popular person who grew from very humble origins. So, all the northern states, they were totally following Abraham Lincoln, and they liked him very much. But in his government, there was a disagreement over the institution of slavery. They demanded the abolition of Negro slavery throughout the Confederacy and the recognition of political equality between the white and Negro races. They said there should not be any racial discrimination between whites and blacks. But what happened with the Confederacy? A collection of 11 southern states left the Union in 1860 and 1861 secession. Secession means separated. They got separated from the Union government and they started acting independently. So the Confederacy as a country declared independence for the explicit purpose of holding Africans as the slaves. So they were adamant, they want at any cost Africans as the slaves, and they got separated from the Northern Union government. So on April 12th, 1861, the start of the Civil War, the war started. The South fires the first shot at Fort Sumter, starting the Civil War. This is in Virginia, and they started firing. Lincoln calls for 75,000 militia to put down the rebellion. This causes four more southern states to secede. So then Milton declared war. He called 75,000 soldiers, and there was a fierce fight between the northern states and the southern states. Then four more southern states they were added to Confederate states. So between 1861 to 65, the American Civil War took place. A very severe war took place. In 1861, Abraham Lincoln sworn in as President of the United States, and in 1863, Lincoln announced Emancipation Proclamation. That means they freed slaves in the Confederate States. All the southern states have to release the slaves, and that was also called as the 13th Amendment, which was created to release all the slaves in the entire United States. Nowhere the slavery should be followed. And in 1865, Civil War ended. 1865, April 15th, Lincoln was assassinated by John Wilkes Booth. So he was a sympathizer of the southern states, the Confederate states, and could not bear Lincoln declaring the amendment which has to release all the slaves in the entire United States. He did not like it, and this is John Wilkes Booth. And one day Lincoln was watching a play. Those days, you remember, the recreation was only stage plays. There were no cinema, theaters, and others. So only stage plays were played, and Lincoln was watching it, and he was hiding behind Lincoln, and then he shot him in the head in the theater itself. Okay, that is how Lincoln was killed in assassination, just because he wanted the slavery to be removed from the southern states, and that led to the Civil War and ultimately to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln.
What did Abraham Lincoln's assassination look like? On the evening of April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln was attending a play at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. The president's box was located on the balcony level, providing a clear view of the stage. A Confederate sympathizer, John Wilkes Booth, slipped into the theater's backstage, silently making his way toward the presidential box. You see, at this point, the president's bodyguard, John F. Parker, should have been ready, but unfortunately Parker was given permission to leave due to a perceived lack of threats. Thus, Booth approached Lincoln from behind and fired a single shot into the back of Lincoln's head, severing his spinal cord. The sound of the gunshot startled the audience, causing confusion and panic. Booth then leaped from the president's box onto the stage, shouting the words, "Sic semper tyrannis, thus always to tyrants," as he landed. Booth managed to escape through a side door, leaving the theater and disappearing into the night.
So that was the background to this poem. Students, I think you have an idea about it now. So Walt Whitman also was an ardent follower of Abraham Lincoln, and he could not bear the death of his beloved President Abraham Lincoln, and in that grief he wrote this poem, "O Captain, my Captain." Now let us discuss the poem. O Captain, my Captain, by Walt Whitman. O Captain, my Captain, our fearful trip is done. The ship has weathered every rack, the prize we sought is won. Here, Captain means Captain is referred to Abraham Lincoln. And the fearful trip. What is fearful trip? That is the dreadful civil war which took place for nearly 4 years between the northern states and the southern states on the issue of slavery. Now the ship has weathered, and ship is a metaphorical comparison for the United States of America. So there is a lot of comparison, students. Captain is a metaphor for Abraham Lincoln. Then fearful trip is a metaphor for dreadful civil war, and the ship is a metaphor for the country, United States of America, and has weathered every rack. That means has suffered. Lot of sufferings were there because of the war, and now it has overcome. The country has overcome all the obstacles and hardships like strong winds. How strong winds become an obstacle for the ship. In the same way, civil war was an obstacle for the welfare of the country. Now it is over, he says. The prize we sought is won. What was the prize they wanted? Removal of the slavery. And it is, they won it, they got it. But what happened? The victory of the Union was there, but it was not, they were not able to enjoy it. The port is near, the bells I hear, the people all exulting while follow eyes the steady keel, the vessel grim and daring. So the port is near means all the people, the ship is coming near the port so that it can be harbored, and the people are waiting there excitedly to watch the ship. But what happened? The keel was steady. That means keel is the bottom part of the ship, students, which balances it, and then that was steadily moving towards the port, and the vessel grim and daring, but the ship is not at all happy. The people were all very excited to receive their president and be ruled by him, but what happened? Because of the assassination of the king, of the president, the ship became very grim. That means serious and bold. That is the meaning of grim. But oh heart, 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 oh the bleeding drops of red, where on the deck my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Here, Walt Whitman is lamenting. He says the bleeding drops of red. That means he was killed. He was shot in his head with the gun. So the bleeding drops of red were there, and on the deck, he lies, fallen cold and dead. Here, bleeding drops of red is an exaggeration of the incident, and it is called as hyperbole, students. Now, this is the stanza one summary. The speaker is shouting out to his captain, "Oh, captain." That means he's talking to the captain, and that they've finally made it home after a frightening trip. So that means after the Civil War, now it is a time for enjoyment. And they were on a ship that survived or weathered strong winds. That means the racks are the strong winds which are a threat to the ship, but they overcome them. They are probably tired after such a grueling voyage, but apparently they've succeeded in their mission, or what the speaker calls their prize. Whatever this mission or prize was, we know that it wasn't easy to get. So that is the stanza one, first stanza, students. Now we move on to stanza two. O captain, my captain, rise up and hear the bells. Rise up, for you the flag is flung, for you the bugle trills. So he's calling out, Captain, come on, wake up, get up. Rise up means get up. We can't see you just lying down there on the bed. So that is the technique of talking to the dead is called apostrophe, student. This is again a literary device. Usually we don't talk to the dead people, but here out of strong grief, Walt Whitman is talking to Abraham Lincoln, though he is dead. So this technique is called apostrophe. He uses here, Captain, my captain, rise up, he's telling. And here the bells. See, the bells of victory are ringing there. Come on, we hear them. And for you the flag is flung. For you the bugle trills. Bugle is a musical instrument. All the people are ready and the soldiers are ready with their bugle and they are blowing them. For you, bouquets and ribbon wreaths. For you, the shores are crowding. So, you all know the bouquets. They were ready, and the ribbon wreaths are the circular flowers which are offered to the death. So, there is a swing, students, for the happy, from the happy moments to sorrowful moments here. He says, the people who were actually waiting to be ruled by you in your presidentship. But what happened? You are dead now. Now they are ready with their bouquets and the ribbon wreaths to attend the funeral. So for you, they call the swaying mass, their eager faces turning. So American people who supported Lincoln, they are all waiting over there in large crowds. But he was dead. Here, Captain, dear father, this arm beneath your head. It is some dream that on the deck you've fallen cold and dead. So again he says, he calls him father. Most of the people used to call Abraham Lincoln as father. So he says this poet is recollecting in a reminiscence and tries to consider this death to be fancy. That means maybe I am dreaming. But at last, he has to believe that Captain is dead. Poet calls him father because for him Lincoln is not just a military leader, but the father of the nation and laments over his loss. He could not bear with that. My captain does not answer. His lips are pale and still. My father does not feel my arm. He has no pulse nor will. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. From fearful trip, the victor ship comes in with the object won. So he says, my captain does not answer now, because though the nation is safe and the war has ended, he does not wake up. And he has put his arm under his head, but he does not wake up. Exult, O shores, and ring, O bells, but I with mournful tread walk the deck, my captain lies fallen cold and dead. Actually, the people were all ready to enjoy and be excited. On the shores they were waiting. That means in the country they were waiting. But I with mournful tread, I am so sad and sorrowful, I am walking towards the dead body. Walk the deck, my captain lies, fallen cold and dead. Dead people are cold, so he's fallen there. So that is the poem, students. Captain, my captain. Deck is the place where the funeral takes place, and he was kept there to be visited by all the visitors. And that is the cemetery of Lincoln. Here it is the cemetery of Lincoln. And the poem ends with both victories as well as loss. You can see that, students. So now the comprehension questions. Answer the following questions in about 75 to 100 words. Who is addressed as captain in the poem O Captain, My Captain, and why? So in the poem O Captain, My Captain by Walter Whitman, Abraham Lincoln is referred to as the captain because he was the president who steered the country throughout the turbulent times. A captain of a ship leads the ship, and a president of a country leads the country. The ship is anchored safe and sound, its voyage closed and done. What do the ship and the voyage symbolize? So, the ship is a metaphor for the United States, which has been battered, that means severely hit, with heavy loss of life and property during the Civil War. Despite the difficulties, the ship is ultimately anchored safe and sound. The captain's ship has been through tough times, having weathered every rack, and the voyage is a symbol of the journey of northern states of America through the Civil War fought for liberating the slaves. The third question, what does the phrase fearful trip refer to? What was the prize sought that they have won? So, in the first line of Whitman's poem, the speaker says that he and his captain reached the end of the fearful trip, which is a reference to the civil war between the northern and the southern states. The prize sought is the attainment of independence from slavery. Fourth question, what does the poet refer to his experience as some dream? Is he dreaming? Explain. The poet is surprised to see the ship's captain who guided the whole crew to the land from within a fearful fight, now lying on the deck covered with blood. This seemed like a dream to the poet. He is not in a position to believe that. He's thinking he was dreaming. Fifth question, what does the speaker ask the captain to do? Why doesn't the latter respond? The speaker wants the captain to rise while hearing the bells. The captain does not answer because he is no more. He is assassinated in 1865 after the American Civil War. What does the bleeding drops of red mean? What figurative language is bleeding drops of red? The line, oh, the bleeding drops of red, is a hyperbole, that means exaggeration, where the poet compares the feeling for the captain as bleeding, which is slightly an exaggeration that the heart is bleeding. So, hope you have understood the poem, and if you have any queries, please do not hesitate to put them in the comment section. Thanks for watching, and if this tutorial had made sense, please like, share, and do not forget to subscribe. That means a lot for me. Okay, bye bye for now, and let's meet up in the next video. Bye, take care.